Sara, you've had an extraordinary career. You have interviewed the Taliban in Pakistan. You've been to the bottom of the Atlantic where the Titanic sank. You have been to Sudan and Somalia and reported on famines as a network reporter and correspondent. And yet, I know that it hasn't been just all glamour in your life, because you've certainly had your share of curveballs too. And one of the big ones was when your second daughter was born. So can you just share with me a little bit about that experience, having a daughter that was born ultimately with, a disability, as you discovered, and how that changed things and how you handled it and what you learned along the way?
Well, I often compare it to when you're on a plane and everything is going well and you're at that comfortable cruising altitude, and you never want it to happen that you hear the pilot get on the loudspeaker and say, well, you may have noticed we're descending and we're nowhere near the airport. This has actually happened to me, by the way. And we're going to be landing in an airport. It's going to be fine, but we're not landing where you thought you were going to land. And I think that was what it was like, that moment where I knew exactly where we were going. We had our daughter's name picked out. We knew where her room was going to be. We just moved apartments to have more room.
You were living in Manhattan?
We were living in Manhattan, and we had a really pretty apartment, and we moved to another one with more space, and I had it all pictured. And then when she was born, we landed at a different place. And when she was just 24 hours old and in my arms, she wasn't nursing. And I called the nurse in and I said, what's going on? She's not feeding. And within a couple of days, she was in intensive care, and they told us that she'd had a seizure. And that was the biggest curveball of my life.
So in that moment of just discovering that you've landed in a very different place than where you thought, what did you do to pick yourself up?
I think it's so important to have people you love around you, and that's what you draw on. You draw on, in my case, my husband, our older daughter, even though she was only 3.5 at the time, seeing her bright, sweet little face as she came down the hospital corridor. When I looked at her, I just thought, we'll get there. We'll get there for us, and we'll get there for you and the rest of my extended family. But in addition to that, I think for me, I believe in emotional muscle. I believe in the fact that over time, when things go wrong, it actually makes us stronger. So that all the times when little things had gone wrong before, without knowing it, I'd been building this emotional muscle. And so without knowing it, I was stronger than I knew. All the brain studies show us that when our muscles fatigue, it's really more our mind. And that's the part where we need that strength. So I was calling on every single bit of that I had. But I often think you don't fail when there's really no way you can fail. What can you do? You have to go forward. And you've got this cute little kid looking up at you saying, what are you going to do?
Yeah, but it's funny, there's that saying, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But the truth is that some people, when they land in a place they didn't think, that life doesn't go to plan and things fall apart, they can fall apart. Not everybody rises to the occasion.
And you know what? I think that everybody has moments of falling apart. And I don't think that's wrong. In other words, I don't tell everybody every time I walk out of the room, go into my bedroom and throw myself on the bed and cry. You know what? I think that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think if we kind of kid each other and ourselves that we're all strong all the time, I think that's kind of sending the wrong message. Because I know I'm not always. I know I have those moments. And I call up my girlfriends and, and but then I do think that the muscle that you've built over time and the fact that you've gotten through things before, and honestly, being a reporter, I think for me, that's part of it. Because I have been in places where I've seen devastation that I cannot imagine. And I have seen people endure things I would never imagine being able to endure. So I was always able to put what was happening to us in perspective, in this big frame, of what happens to lots of people.
And I think that is really powerful, being able to reframe. And I know myself, it's those adversities, those things when life doesn't go to plan. Sometimes they're small, but they do build up our tolerance for and our capacity for handling life.
Yeah.
And you know, as you know, in Brave, my book that you've read,
I love your book.
and thank you, and you wrote a wonderful endorsement for it. But you know, I talk about training the brave. You know, the more often we act bravely, it is like a muscle that even in small things, it builds us. It builds our courage for the times when we really need a lot of courage.
You know, it's interesting because I've gotten the opportunity to interview over the course of my career people in the military, people training as astronauts, people in all different walks of life. And what I have discovered with some of those people who routinely, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, flying with an F-15 Strike Eagle pilot. You know, these are people who are doing stuff that
bold,
really
scary.
Yeah, should read your book. Except maybe
No,
they have to write
don't need to read the book.
So these guys. So I'm like, well, how do they do what they do? They train. And what you do is you actually overlay, I think, those times where you're going to wimp it with this knowledge that, you know what, you go through the checklist, you do what you need to do. And for me, it's honest to goodness, I was there in the hospital with my notepad and my pen and my phone, and I went to reporter mode.
Yeah.
And that's my comfort zone.
That's your skill set. You know, you're good at that.
Exactly. And, you know, I think for all of us, everybody has that skill set. They have that thing that they do well, that's what you should go to. And you go to ground with your thing that makes you feel confident. And also, the other thing I would say is I definitely learned, and I've interviewed a lot of doctors, and I love doctors. I love medicine. I love medical stories. And suddenly I was like, I love it better from the outside. Not so cool on the inside. But, you know, it's hard when you're going through it. But even I was deferential sometimes to my detriment. In other words, you have to ask questions.
Yeah.
That didn't last that long. But soon, when things are going really poorly, you need to trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Any great doctor will tell you that.
Yeah.
And
even if that means challenging them.
And you will have to challenge.
Yeah.
You will have to challenge. It will come to that.
Yeah.
You can do it nicely.
Yeah.
But you've got to do it. And you've just got to go, I must do this. This is necessary. And there are people counting on me.
So when it comes to going, all right, I've landed in a place I didn't think I'd be. You know, life is not as I had been thinking it would be at this moment, and it may never again be the way I thought it would. And I think it can tilt us on its axis. You know, suddenly we don't feel like we've got the ground solid under our feet. You know, when it comes to just creating a future that's different from the one you had envisaged, and just getting on with doing what needs to be done, whether it's to help a child who is ill, or it's to deal with something else in our life that's sometimes very much beyond our control. You know, what have you found to be just helpful things that you can do for yourself that keep you in the right headspace?
Well, I think sometimes, for me, a lot of the time it's writing. In other words, I need to pull away from whatever the big thing is, whatever the kind of the 911, the 000, because I can go both ways there. You know, whatever the emergency is, whatever the really big deal is, and pull aside, and I love to write. So for me, it's an incredible form of therapy to sit down at my computer and write. I'm working on fiction, you know, write something,
so
pretend.
So you're like writing
I'm
fiction.
writing something, well, it doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere, but I'm excited about it, and I'm writing something that's completely, it's historical fiction, so obviously I couldn't totally let go of, you know, that notion of having some sense of reality. But what I'm doing is I'm writing a book where there's pretend characters that I've completely made up, and then there's real characters and they're intersecting.
You can just step into the fantasy world every now and again.
I think it's okay. And at least that's a permission I've given myself. But the other thing is, I think, and this is, I think, important, I think it's easy to get caught into believing that there is a roadmap for our life. And I really think we've got to be aware of that trap. I think we've got to constantly be recognizing that they're detours and that they can provide great scenery. and that they can actually be the most interesting part. You don't know the people you're going to meet. You don't know the adventures that you're going to have. And absolutely woven into even some of the things that I would just say, you know what, if that didn't have to happen to me, I'd be really happy. Woven into those rotten times have been some really marvelous moments. And I mean, I think of the therapists, for example. You know, when Jackie's doing much, much better. But when we were working with Jackie and we had our older daughter, Sophie, and we were trying to make sure that she didn't get lost, siblings are so important and you want to feel like everybody's getting attention. To have these therapists come in cheerful, smart, with attitude, you know, rocking it and making our little one do stuff. These were incredible people that I would never have met any other way.
It is so easy when things aren't as we want them to be to spend our time dwelling on what isn't the way we want it to be, on what we've lost or what we've missed or what is never going to be, rather than going, this is as it is. I'm not going to fight reality. What is there for me to make the most of in this place? You know, what are the gifts? And I think that it does take being really intentional, because I know myself, it's easy to get into a little pity party, and I think almost we can be wired to focus on what we've lost or what isn't, what's missing. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time focusing on what's missing, what they don't have.
And I don't want to pretend that I every single day walk through thinking, you know, I'm not grateful every single moment of every single day. I don't want anybody to think that, but but I do think it's intentional, and I do think that if you focus on that and you know what it is to me, it's like, where do I point my nose? And am I heading toward the people who make me feel happier, who make me be better, who cause me to stretch, even when that's hard? Or am I heading towards negativity? And you know what? It's not hard to figure out which is more fun. So maybe I just like it to be fun. So I'm always going in that positive direction and the interesting direction, because for me, having that work piece has been important.
So let's talk about that work piece for a minute. You've had an amazing career. I mean, you've done things that almost, when I read about the going to the bottom of the Atlantic, I'm like, seriously? Sarah did that? Seriously? Anyway.
Super fun.
I mean, not many people have done that. So, you know, you had an incredible career in New York, you know, and then you decided to move to Australia. And obviously, career-wise, had to have taken a little bit of a hit.
Well, it wasn't a decision I made for my career. That's a fact. I mean, given everybody's career is different, but in media, that was a great place to be. New York was a great place to be.
It's a bit more happening than Melbourne.
Well, it's just a bigger market. There's just no question about it. I was working for the national media in New York City, so that part was great. But you know what? I think it was one of those situations where I wanted to, because Andrew and I, my husband and I, had talked about it. It was the right time. I always felt, even when we got married, it was really a discussion. It's not fair to me that it was one or the other. Two great countries, two great families, lots of opportunities. But then what is tricky is figuring out how you remake your career in a new place, and it isn't always straightforward, and it takes some creative thinking. It takes some lateral moves. You know, I think of Patty Sellers at Fortune, who talks about a career isn't a ladder, it's a jungle gym. Now that's awesome. You know, if you have that in your head, that's the way to go. It's a real, it can't just be straight up. And what is that anyway?
Well, I mean,
what is that anyway? Where's it going?
Find me someone who's had a career that goes in a straight line.
Yeah, we'll just pull it out.
Yeah, maybe they existed 40 years ago.
It doesn't work. It does not work. You know, and I'm not joking. Ladders can be pulled out. You know, jungle gyms is a lot more. It's a lot steadier.
It's more interesting. You don't know quite what's going to come, and you get to be more creative in creating what it is too. And I know you've done a lot of that. So let's talk about starting from zero in a new country.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting because when we were speaking about this before, I think one of the challenges for me is that a lot of my life it's been feeling like you're starting from zero. Every time I start a new book, you're starting from zero. It's the ultimate blank page. That's genuinely what it is. You're looking at the computer screen and there are no letters on it. I usually start optimistically with the number 1 at the bottom of the page. First of all, because I like 1, and secondly, because then there's something on the page.
Not 0.
Yeah, and then you can start with the or a or and, you get a noun or verb. But joking aside, there's nothing there. And I actually think it's a great metaphor for a lot of times. When I moved from the United States to Australia, I was starting from 0. But then as I thought about that, I thought, because it's daunting, I thought, I've done this before. I can do this again. Every time a kid graduates and goes on to the next school, they're starting from 0. We forget that. We forget how much ability we have to start from 0. Because what happens as we get older is we do not do it as frequently, and we're more risk averse.
Well, and I wrote a blog and Forbes column on this recently about sunk cost bias. We have a bias. Yeah, we sink a lot of ourselves, a lot of years of our life, a lot of energy, a lot of our reputation, money on a certain path. And we have an aversion to just going, okay, I'm going to change and go somewhere else where I can't get all the benefit of all that time and money and everything I've invested. And I think being willing to go, I may have been moving in this direction. There's a lot of inertia in this direction, but is it moving me in a direction that I want to go still?
That's right.
And is it actually working for me?
Well, that's it. And I think that you have to be willing to actually take that leap and start from 0. And that actually it's incredibly powerful and liberating to do it. I mean, one of the things when we moved over here, I did the same thing when I moved to New York, except there I had the safety net because I'd moved for a job. That's a different situation. But in the case of moving to Australia, lots of my friends in New York said, okay, do you know where you're going to live, where the kids are going to go to school, And I said, well, no, I don't know any of that. I don't know what my job is going to be. I don't know, I know nothing. And so we really were starting from 0. And at first that's quite daunting. And then it's frankly liberating.
Yeah.
And I had friends saying, I actually think that sounds great. Because when you do the move, you're forced to see yourself differently because you are operating in a different environment. Yeah. And I loved it.
Well, and I think, whether it's starting a new book with a blank page, I often think of it in terms of just a blank canvas.
Yes.
Like, okay, and some of my friends who've lost their jobs have said, in hindsight, it was the best thing because they're like, well, if I'm not going to do that, I get to choose what do I want to do?
Exactly.
What do I like doing? And you can start all over it. And it's easier to do that in a new place than it is when you're already fixed in something,
Well, and to your point about the sunk costs, I think what maybe a lot of people will find is all those things that you used, although they don't add up to the same thing, you're going to find that if you've got a skill, it's going to come in handy. I mean, if you're in that little boat and you've left the mothership and you're busy in the lifeboat, you quickly assess what are my tools here, and you look at the basics and then you go, what's that cool gizmo? I've never seen that, but then you see all the stuff that and that to me is like a lot of what's happening.
I think about that because I started out in the corporate world and then I went back and did psychology and coaching, and I remember thinking, well, maybe my time working at big corporates in marketing was a bit of a waste. I didn't go on and pursue that career, but just what I learnt about organisations and politics and the psychology of people in organisations, that has been so relevant to my work in coaching and speaking and everything else that I look back and go, it's extraordinarily valuable. I didn't see how valuable it was at the time.
Don't you feel like sometimes too, it's like building a mosaic, but you're actually right close to it, so you can't see the pattern.
Yeah.
And then you pull back and you say, wow, I didn't really realize when I was picking up this skill, meeting that person, learning that thing. And that's the part about moving to a new place. If you're even remotely open, you're learning so much new information, and that changes you in really great ways. I can't imagine not having moved to Australia.
Yeah. So Sarah, you and I met at a women's leadership conference where we were both speakers, and I got to just sit there and admire everything you had to say and your insights. But one thing that I know I've found so many times, and I'm guilty of it myself, is just we doubt ourselves too much, we back ourselves too little, and we too often don't ask for what it is we want, you know, just to own our worth and ask for it. And
I couldn't agree more.
yeah.
I think in really specific ways and
Yeah.
in big ways too.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my first job in television. So I'd been looking for a while, and you know, it was not instantly obvious to people that they should hire me, much as it was obvious to me myself. And you know, I'm shocked and, you know, saddened to say that dozens actually said no. And
Fools.
no, it's very, very clever. I had no skill. I had a videotape, and I'm not saying this. This is genuinely true. I had one news story, one little piece of anchoring that I'd done at CNN in the middle of the night as an intern, where I was wearing a bow tie and had arched my eyebrows. So I looked more. I was awful, and it was like the stylist.
Is that online, by the way? Because I would love to see that.
No, I'm burning it. I've burned all copies, but it was so bad. So surprisingly, I didn't get a job. So finally, I realized that if I went myself, that I might have a chance. And there I was actually resourceful. So I would call up the news directors. I recommend this for anybody with any job. And I would say, as it happens, I'm going to be in your town in Macon, Georgia, next Wednesday. And I just wondered if you would have a chance to meet. Now, I had no intention of going to Macon unless they were going to give me an interview. But I always said I was already there.
Yeah.
So then they would usually say, well, I don't have time. And I'd say, well, just 15 minutes for me to drop in because I'm there. And they would usually feel like they had to. If you can get yourself...
You show you're that keen.
If you show you're there in that chair, it is so hard to say no to people. So I started to get these interviews, and then I would have one person connect me to the next. You know, I'd just sit there desperately asking, well, is there anyone you can recommend? And they were so desperate to get me out of there, they'd recommend their friend. And then I'd say, your friend so-and-so foolishly told me to call you, and now it's... So slowly, I finally get a call back. I go down for the interview. And I'm super excited. And I said, okay, you know, I finished the interview, and the news director looks at me and he goes, well, would you like to be the anchor and the reporter at 9 Alive News? It was in Tupelo. You don't know how excited I was.
Can you just tell me where Tupelo is, though?
Oh, right next to One Below? That's a bad joke. It is near Memphis.
Memphis, okay, Tennessee.
And actually, it was spectacular. It was fabulous. I had a great time. But that was the first joke they told me. Tupelo, Mississippi. And Tupelo, I'd never been to Mississippi. It's famously, now you're going to know this, the birthplace of Elvis.
Well, I know he's...
Memphis.
Yes,
you think of him with Memphis, but see?
Okay.
Yes,
Tupelo,
so I knew.
Tennessee.
See what I mean? You just never
You learn something every day.
So I take that, you know, so he offers me this job, and I was over the moon. And by the way, you would no more get that job like just rocking up today than that I did. I mean, now it's like years to get that job, and I'm not kidding. But then they again foolishly offered it to me. And so he said, do you want this? And I said, yes. I just said yes.
Yeah.
And he started laughing. And he goes, can I give you a piece of advice for your next interview? And I said, yes. And he said, you might want to ask what I'm going to pay you. It never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that I had any bargain. You know, to say that I was grateful is, you know, really underestimating my level of gratitude. So yeah, we don't think. I only thought, maybe that's not such a great story because I was really lucky he gave me that job. But you know, maybe in the course of...
You could have got 20% more money.
I could have gotten maybe 5, but you know, I could have gotten
you don't know.
$10 more a week. It wasn't very much they paid me. But the point of the matter is, I think that I have to check myself because I'm very capable of doing that to this day.
And there is so much research that shows that women don't ask and women don't negotiate. And they start out their careers on less because more men say, hey, I want more straight out of college or university. And they set off in a different trajectory. You know, they're always asking for more. And then if you just even put a standard increase on it, it just ends up at a very different place 20 years down the track.
Absolutely. No, I think it is important. And the other thing I would say is the times when I have forced myself. I mean, the one that comes to mind is when I was at NBC, and I was really, my first story or second, I can't remember, at NBC was covering the Macy's Day Parade. And to be honest, as much as that's a wonderful parade, that was not why I had gone to the network. And I did not want to be covering parades. And I thought, how am I going to convince them that I can do hard news? So it was right at the time that the Marines were going into Somalia. And I just had no idea, but I thought it never hurts to ask. So I went around the corner to the foreign news editor's office, and his door was open, and I tiptoed in, and he looked at me, and I said, 5 minutes? And he said, feel free, sit down. He couldn't have been nicer. And I said, well, I know that Marines have gone in, NBC in Mogadishu, Christmas, people might want to come home. If you need anybody else, I would just love to go. And he just nodded, and I backed out, and I thought that was a disaster, and I'm probably going to be fired. And later that day, some very helpful person on the desk came over and said, have you had your shots?
Wow.
And I went, what? And she said, well, you're on the plane tonight to
Mogadishu.
So
Wow.
when you do ask, and that changed my life at NBC.
Yeah.
From that moment.
Yeah.
That was the change.
And just, I guess my point there, you had to have the guts or the balls or whatever you want to call it to just front on in there, because it was pretty gutsy to do that. You were just a little insignificant person in their eyes of the network.
Yes, indeed.
But you know, there's
my stomach hurt. My stomach hurt as I did it. I was nervous. I really didn't know what but I thought, how can anyone fault me for asking? He's gonna say no. Yeah. He's going to say no, but he can't yell at me for asking, hopefully.
But you had to risk the rejection and the possibility of being yelled at, or even, maybe
laughed at, I think was what I was afraid of. And that's not fun. I think we'd actually rather be yelled at than laughed at. We hate being laughed at.
But how often do we not do things because we're afraid of the possibility of being humiliated or rejected, or the sting that we'll feel if we are.
That's right.
And so we don't ask, and we don't put ourselves forward, and we don't negotiate, and we miss out on ever knowing it could happen, and that changed everything for you.
And do you know what? When I got on that plane, and I'm reading everything, and which I already had been, and then I landed, and I got there, I had another moment of just a real crisis of confidence, and I thought, how am I going to do this? Now I've actually, the imposter syndrome that they talk about, that's exactly how I felt. And I thought, what am I going to do? I looked around the room, and, it was very difficult conditions, but every single person I saw in that room, I recognized from our network.
Yeah.
And they were famous.
Veteran bar correspondents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm the newbie who's just off the Macy's Day Parade. And I just looked at them and I thought, what the heck am I going to do? And I went over to Martin Fletcher, who was at that time our Jerusalem or Tel Aviv correspondent in the Mideast. And he had the nicest face, and he still does. He's a great guy. And I said, any tips? And he said, sure. Just go outside. And I looked at him and I said, and then what? He said, anybody you meet is a story. And that was it. That was the best advice anyone ever gave me. I stopped being insecure. And from there on we went. But that was just, he gave me the confidence to trust myself. You know what you're doing? Go on out the door. Do it.
You know what? It is such a powerful metaphor, whether you're a journalist or not.
Doesn't matter.
Just bloody well show up.
Get out the door.
Just
don't sit there.
Up.
You're not doing it in your living room.
I tell you what,
have to get out the door.
Every single thing, I think, throughout my professional life, but just across the board, has come from just getting out of the comfort zone, putting myself out there, just in one way, shape or form, risking falling flat on the face, risking people going, what the hell, who are you to do that?
Exactly.
And very rarely do they actually do that.
No, they actually really, most of the time, want you to succeed.
Yeah.
And the people who are laughing, and they do exist, I've gotten letters from those people. Yeah. Who do you think you are? You mostly laugh,
Yeah.
That lipstick, what were you thinking? I don't know. Was it a bad color? Probably.
Move on.
Move. Life is short. Don't let that stuff stick.
Well, I think
if
we're brave enough, often enough, sometimes we fall on our face, and sometimes people don't like who we are and what we're doing.
That's okay, but there's way more people. There's just in general way more who are saying, good on you.
Yeah. Get more out of life when you're being bold and brave and putting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
When you think about, on a daily basis, what it is to just be bold and be brave and be courageous, What does it mean for you? Like, what are the different faces that courage has for you as you go about your life? Whether it's raising kids, being married, doing your job.
I think it's usually the time when you have to talk back to your own insecurity. And we have them, I think all of us have them in every aspect of our life. So it's that moment of doubt. It's talking back to the little voice in your head that says you can't, that you're going to mess up. And so for me, it's kind of cross-checking, taking a sounding on that. Is that real? Or is that kind of phantom image that's not the real deal? So it's being willing to have tough conversations. It's trusting other people as well, knowing that, if you raise kids, it's thinking, how do I empower you to go out and live your life boldly? And sometimes that means, like I think with our older daughter, she's very keen on horseback riding. And, I started her out and I thought, this will be great. She'll do dressage. You go around in a ring. How bad can it be? Of course she likes show jumping.
Yeah.
Of course she likes higher and higher.
She is your daughter.
She is my daughter. I know. And what has been really good, and I find this to be helpful, sometimes I actually have to walk away. You know what I mean? Like if I can't make her be bold, and my husband and I play a little tag team because it makes me nervous sometimes.
Yeah, well.
So I'll wander away till she's got it a little bit mastered, and then I'll come back because the key thing is that she do it.
Yeah.
And I think, cross-checking yourself on those things. And that's why that old, takes a village is really important because we can't always do it right. So my other thing that I'm a big believer in is, and Sophie knows this, but I'm a huge believer in surrounding her with a tribe of wise women. I've been so blessed in my life to have these incredible friends. So I am constantly making sure she sees my cool friends doing cool things and being their warm, loving selves at the same time. All kinds of things. Because they are reference points for her. And they inspire her and enable her and embolden her. So that is part of how, that's very conscious for me.
So what you're saying in terms of just what courage is,
Yes.
is, I get that, and in empowering our kids to take risks, knowing that they're real risks sometimes.
Sometimes they are, yeah.
But also, I couldn't agree more, whether it's for our children or for ourselves, surrounding ourselves.
Yes.
With, you clearly do, but
and with people who are bold too, so that when I do, and we all have those moments where we want to wimp it, not doing that, just talking back to that. And, again, I do remind myself again and again and again, do what you tell your kids to do. Give it a go. Yeah. Give it a try. How many times have I said that to the kids? Just try, get in there.
Yeah.
And so I try to do that. I try to take my own advice. And I try to step back and do it.
Said
it's
it
not. Oh my gosh, it's not. That's a thing. It's
I
not.
know. I have to go through this
work.
myself.
And it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
But then you start to see, well, I do think this. It is also, as you say, train the brave. The longer you do it, the more you do it, the more you go, I can do that.
And you know what? And I think on the back of all that, to me, sometimes being courageous is forgiving myself for being imperfect, for sometimes being a bit cowardly and letting the fear win out and just going, I'm human and I have my flaws and I have my insecurities and my imperfections and I didn't do so well today.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to spend the rest of the day beating up on myself.
I think
I'm
that's
going to just recommit to doing better tomorrow. And that in itself, it just connects with that deep fear that we have that we're really not good enough and going, you know what, I am good enough despite the fact that today maybe I wasn't as good as I wanted to be.
Yeah, I absolutely think you've got to be generous because, chances are you're really generous with all your friends and with other people. And where does that generosity, it evaporates when it comes to ourselves. And, you know, that one's hard.
Yeah, but I tell you what, it's a really important one, because we can be brave and out there and out there and out there. But if we beat up on ourselves when we mess up, then we're not really present to just how cool we are, or to how lucky we are, or to how great our lives are.
And I agree. So, and I do think, and also all that time that you're spending on that, and I do think I'm getting better at that as I get older. You know, I don't think it's always going to be my number one strength. You know, I do kind of go,
not mine.
Whack, whack, you
It's
know.
not mine. I spend my life going
Oh
like
gosh,
that.
I know, but I am getting better at it, because I'm starting to see things that are, you know, they're different aspects, and the road remains interesting.
It does. And you know, what's that Chinese saying? May you live an interesting life. Well, you know, you certainly have. I have no doubt it will continue to be. And Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.